warm welcome to you. Thank you again for joining me. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you and welcome Saffra from Hoggywobbles in.
Hi, Mike.
Hello, Saffra. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm all right.
Fantastic. Saffra, it's wonderful to welcome you. We're really looking forward, and I'm really looking forward to understand more about Hoggywobbles, especially the part about it being really quite different and something quite unique. But I know you run a hedgehog hospital, but where did that all start? Where did the interest with hedgehogs all come about?
So I suppose to cut the long story short, I've always loved animals, but I developed a special love for hedgehogs and rabbits when I was quite young. And I was lucky enough to be brought up in the countryside in Cambridgeshire with a lovely big garden. So I was exposed to hedgehogs from quite a young age. And so I just was fascinated by them. And then when I became 18 and I was able to, I started volunteering at a wildlife hospital and working with hedgehogs, and I just loved it even more. And so as I developed my skills and learnt about hedgehog hair, I just thought, you know what, actually I think there's a need for Hoggywobbles in my area and I'm going to create it. So that's what I went ahead and did.
So tell me more about, because I know you have worked in a number of hedgehog hospitals, as you've mentioned, but tell me more about that. Which hospitals did you work at, and what was important about that experience for you?
So where I volunteered first was Shepworth Hedgehog Hospital, which anyone in the Cambridgeshire area will know is like one of the major, the big hospitals can take, about 200 hedgehogs at peak time of year. And what, my basic hair is what I've learned from Shepworth, and I worked there for about 3 years as a volunteer, and I kind of just was always asking questions and always learning. And then after that, I worked for more local rescues. So I work in partnership with Boa Hedgehog Rehab, or Amber, she's amazing. And I also now work in partnership with Suffolk Hedgehog Hospital and Sue, she's an absolute star. And basically we just developed like a little community of discussions between rescues, and just over time I built up a lot of advisors, which I think is really important if you're working with hedgehogs, when you're not sure about something, to get questions and feedback. And that's what I did. So Shepworth was where I started out, and then I kind of moved back more locally to me because it was a bit too far to keep driving to Shepworth. So yeah.
And within that, I'm sure that there were many highlights, but what are some of the highlights for you of working within those various hospitals and rescues?
I think it was just like the different cases and how different they all were, and what I got to see and what I got to work with, and it was just learning all the time. There was never a shift that I went to the hospitals and didn't learn something about, which is why I'm always very pro when someone says to me, oh, I'd quite like to start a rescue. I always say there's nothing that you can do that will be more beneficial than going to a hedgehog hospital and volunteering and learning, because you can go and do all the courses that you like about first aid with a hedgehog, but you will only learn what you need to learn from first-hand practical hands-on experience with hedgehogs.
Yeah. So coming out of that, and you mentioned you've built up a kind of network of hospitals and places around you within Cambridgeshire, but what then led to the thought around Hoggywobbles? And as I mentioned earlier, on your Facebook page, you specifically talk about it being a hospital that's unique and kind of one of its kind. So where did that whole idea come from, and what does make it so unique?
So Hoggywobbles, basically the idea, it was something that I just completely thought up. When I was volunteering at the other hospitals, especially at Shepworth, which is quite big, so it has quite a big capacity, I very quickly saw and was observing that quite a lot of the hedgehog patients, maybe at peak times about 60%, had, they'd had their acute treatment, so they no longer had, say, lungworm, or the injury had been fixed, and they were just in there for secondary monitoring, secondary care. care and to gain weight, and they were taking up substantial spaces that other really sick hedgehogs therefore couldn't get. So I was kind of watching it and thinking, so we're basically blocking up the system here. So really sick hedgehogs, we're turning them away because we've got hedgehogs in here that still need care and they still need an experienced hand, but don't require that kind of acute care that they're in that hospital for. So I started thinking maybe I could create a hospital which was just specialising into convalescence, so kind of the second stage of hedgehog care rather than the acute care. And that way I could therefore help all the other rescues by providing a space that had the equipment, was with an experienced hand, but didn't require that acute care, and therefore I would be opening up the spaces for them so that they could still be taking in acute hedgehogs. So we would basically be making the system work a lot faster and therefore releasing hedgehogs a lot quicker.
Yeah, so you're almost kind of, in human terms, you're almost like a step down facility that is between the acute care and actual release back into the wild.
Yeah, exactly. So I just felt it was really important. A lot of people think maybe secondary care isn't so important for a hedgehog, but it absolutely is. I can't stress that enough. It's also releasing is like my specialist area. So from all the stages you go through, I always think of it a little bit as if you were a human, right? You go into hospital and you go to A&E. That's the first port of call. So that would be like the acute care hospital. But then after that, normally you get moved to a ward which is you're still being cared for and you still need treatment, but it's not so acute and doesn't require the same level of care. So that's when a hedgehog will then be brought to me from the other rescues. I'll then continue that care, which can take weeks to months. It really depends on the hedgehog and how well they do. And then I also facilitate the rescue, so where they're going to be released, whether they're going to be released back to where they came from. All things like that. So we just basically provide a system linked in so that we can basically help the population of hedgehogs far more efficiently than if it was just one rescue, which is obviously the classic way of doing it, but there are so many problems with that, and obviously it means the system is really slow, so we're not getting through as many hedgehogs as we want to.
Yeah, so that means that you must work with a number of different rescues in your area. How many hedgehog rescues are you supporting then, and what's kind of that, I want to call it a footprint, which is not necessarily the right word, but what is your catchment area, so to speak, of the hedgehog rescues that you're supporting?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in touch with quite a few, but with the very close connection, I work with 2 and 3. Bowell Hedgehog Rehab is my main kind of, if you like, my partner in it, and then also Suffolk Hedgehog Hospital. And what we hope to do, because at the moment, obviously, I work from my own home, but when we can expand into a proper hedgehog building, it will mean that I can then service more rescues locally. But in terms of the distance you were asking me, it's probably we're looking around a 10-mile radius. So it's important that when you're working with rescues that you support all your local rescues together, because you need to be able to speak to them and see them and access them if needed. So basically you want to support your local area. So where I am is kind of on the Cambridge border. So we kind of cover Cambridge and Suffolk, a little bit of Suffolk, and then a little bit of Essex at the base. So kind of a few different counties.
Right. Okay. That makes complete sense. And I keep wanting to almost compare the service that you're providing back to kind of put it into human terms, and like I did earlier with the step down facility and that. But what, on a practical level, what would someone see in Hoggywobbles that would be different in terms of the treatment or the facilities that would be different to a normal, what we might call a normal hedgehog rescue? What would the difference in look and feel be?
I mean, in terms of how it looks, it probably looks like most rescues in terms of how the hedgehogs are kept and what we feed them, and the everyday cleaning and weighing is pretty much exactly the same. Obviously, I don't keep incubators because that is acute care. So, of course, people do bring me hedgehogs, but I always say to them, if it is acutely ill, it will therefore go to one of my colleagues at one of the local rescues. The hedgehog will be brought back to me for continued treatment. Obviously, as I hope we can expand and get a proper hedgehog building, certain areas that we want to look into is what I call secondary care treatments. So things like water therapy is really important for hedgehogs that have had soft tissue injuries and need to rebuild their strength in their limbs. So that's something that we want to do. Also nebulizers, that's really, really important. So for hedgehogs that have anything that affects their lungs and their respiratory breathing, so pneumonia, lungworm, conditions like that, nebulizers have been shown over time after they're no longer acutely ill to show continued benefit. So obviously in the weeks after, we would be using nebulizer treatment on them, and which would hopefully help lung scarring and to strengthen their lungs before release. So that obviously our aim is to release them and give them the best chance at life. So we don't want to just, oh, you know, they've no longer got an infection, we'll just release them. It can't be like that. It needs to be thought out. And, you know, that's what I do. I make sure that we give them the absolute best they can do with acute care, and then I deal with everything else.
Fantastic, because you mentioned water therapy, and the last live stream we had Katie South from Prickles and Paws, and she was talking about the water therapy and like you say, the soft tissue injury and being able to build up the muscles and the tendons. Tell me more about the nebulizer therapy. That sounds particularly interesting. How does nebulizer therapy work in the context of hedgehogs?
So, I mean, I use a nebulizer myself in a human form. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's in a human form, it's like a little box, and you get what's called like hypertonic, which is a very salty kind of saline. And the machine basically turns it into a mist and then sprays it out. So for a human, I put it in a mask on my face. For a hedgehog, they get put into a special nebulizer box, and then the spray just pumps into the box. So the hedgehog obviously then just breathes it in. So it's a really great way because it's not stressful for them, obviously non-invasive. All they have to do is be present inside the box. And the benefit for just what is effectively salty saline is quite amazing with animals and with humans. Obviously, it has antibacterial properties, and everyone knows also salt has healing properties, and it actually helps to strengthen the lungs effectively. So if they've got scarring on lungs, just like with humans, it actually improves their lung capacity. So like for example, in humans, when I use my nebulizer, I've been shown in tests to actually have an increase of about 5% in my lung capacity, and which is therefore healthier than other people my age or even athletes. So the benefit for nebulizers for all kinds of animals is really amazing. I really, really support nebulizers. So that is definitely something that we want to do.
I think it's incredible to think of all these different treatments that get applied. Like you say, we think of nebulizers in the context of treatment for humans, but to be able to relate that kind of treatment to hedgehogs, and to know that it's having such a beneficial effect on lung capacity for the hedgehogs, because I know lungworm is something that particularly affects that lung capacity and causes them breathing difficulties, doesn't it?
Yeah, lungworm's really quite awful, and it's interesting actually because we seem to see more of it where I am. In Cambridgeshire, we get a lot of cases of lungworm. I mean, it's a weekly thing. Right. But then I hear from other rescue colleagues elsewhere in the country say actually we don't see it so much. We see other parasites, which is very, very interesting. But yeah, lungworm is really awful for the lungs. You know, they can literally suffocate to death. I've seen hedgehogs that just can't breathe and will go into fits and foam at the mouth, and that's what advanced lungworm causes. And it's really horrible sight. It's not pleasant. And we want to do things, if we can catch it early, then they can be treated, and then obviously have the nebulizer treatment, which will help kind of heal their lungs, if you like, and just improve their lung capacity, which they otherwise wouldn't have got if they weren't given nebulizer treatment. But yeah, it is without doubt one of the most horrible conditions that hedgehogs can get. Not pleasant.
Absolutely. And let's go back also to the water therapy. And I said we discussed it in the last live stream with Katie, but in your context, you're using the water therapy also for the soft tissue damage. How are you using that? What does that look like in practical terms?
So it would be the same system. So obviously we'd have a tub with the water in nice and shallow, so we can support them with our hand. And basically it's a course of about 10-minute sessions daily, once or twice. It depends on the case and depends on the injury. But again, with the nebulizer, this kind of treatment for humans and hedgehogs and all kind of animals has been shown that if you just give it a bit of time and do it over a prolonged period of time, it stretches the muscle, it makes it stronger. And obviously, if a standard rescue doesn't provide those kind of treatments, and then it's just releasing the hedgehog, they're always going to have that weakness in that particular limb or wherever the injury was. And that obviously means that it can reoccur, that it can cause them problems in the wild, that it makes them more of a target as well from other hedgehogs and predators because they're showing a clear weakness. So it's just really important that when we release hedgehogs, we try to do everything that we can to make sure that they are as fit as possible, and we're not releasing them, in any state not to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to pause very quickly. Unfortunately, I've set this up in such a way that I can't actually bring it up on screen, but I wanted to just say hello to some people that are on the chat, and from welcoming us. Well, I'm welcoming people from all over the country and Europe and the world. Hello to Zara from Liverpool. Barbara's joined from Cape Town, all the way from South Africa. Wow. We've got hello to Susan from Birmingham. Malcolm is joining from Reading in Berkshire. It's lovely to have you. Steve from North Yorkshire. It's fantastic to have you all. And you're joining us if you joined us slightly lately. I've got Saffra Monteiro from Hoggywobbles in Cambridgeshire, which is a convalescent hedgehog hospital. And we're finding out all about what makes a convalescent hedgehog hospital different and the treatments and therapies that Saffra is using in the hospital. And of course, the whole point, Saffra, to move it forward to what you're trying to achieve is actually all about release back into the wild. And even though you're doing things like the treatments along the lines of lungworm and parasite treatments, the water therapy and the nebulizers, your goal is release back into the wild, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough, releasing for me is the most important part of helping a hedgehog. Obviously, when you find a poorly or injured hedgehog, they have to be treated first, but I think it's quite underrated and people don't tend to consider. They think, oh, releasing is just a matter of popping them out on the grass, and it's not. It's actually a lot of thought and planning that needs to go into it, because you want to give them the absolute best chance, so you really need to put a lot of thought and understanding into it. And obviously our long-term goals, all rescues long-term goals, is to help the hedgehog population, which has obviously had a massive decline, and we really want to do our bit to improve that. So to ensure that we do that, we need to make sure that releases are really thought through and done in the correct spots. So for example, if we know there's a very high level of badgers in a particular area, we will not release there, because the likelihood is, after all the months and effort that we've gone through to make that hedgehog better, if we then release it there, it could well be killed, attacked, injured, and they'll leave that area. So we're not giving them any benefit by doing that. So we do have to look into places, check gardens, do things. It's quite time consuming, but it's really important. So that is an area that I take very seriously.
And just to kind of support the fact that you take this very seriously, I've picked up your, you've got a release checklist, which is not so much a checklist, it's a very, very long list of requirements. And I'm assuming things that you will check with the release site to make sure that it is appropriate and meets all your criteria. So just tell us a little bit more about that release checklist and the types of things that you're looking for in a release site.
Yeah, so I mean, it's all very much down to the single rescues. I discuss this with all my fellow rescues, and we kind of agree appropriately what we do require and what we don't require. And I know other rescues elsewhere in the country will probably look at that list and say, oh, actually, we're not bothered about that, we do that. But this is from our experience over the years and the research that we've done, and this list is really important that we stick to it. So it's about the safety of the hedgehog, of course. So normal things, hazards in gardens we'll check for. So ponds need to have ramps and escape routes. We don't want drowning hedgehogs. Drains need to be covered. There shouldn't be lots of litter about. We don't want things getting stuck on them. Obviously, no use of poisons or any kind of slug pellets, anything that could be harmful to that, rat poisons. So we're looking for all of that when we view a garden. Location is really important too. So I have a new system I created, which is called the boxing system, which is basically about roads and safety on roads. So if I go to a house and a garden and it's completely boxed in by roads on all sides, then we won't use it, because it means that there's no safe route for that hedgehog to get to other gardens or countryside, and therefore the safety risk is just too high. So it's things like that we look for, really, and obviously space, natural habitat. I have an absolute hatred of fake grass. So you know, we just want real plants, real hedgerows, you know, where they can find food and forage and live quite happily as they should do.
Kind of related to that, one of the questions that has come in is from Heather. And so, Heather, I hope you're here, and good evening to you. Heather was asking, with regards to releasing, when releasing back after rehab, do you always release the hog back to exactly the same place that it was found? And then do you have any way of monitoring them once they are released?
Yeah, so there are two questions that we get asked quite a lot. So if the person who brings us a hedgehog wants the hedgehog back, then we will go and view the place that it was found, or their garden. If it is suitable, then we're more than happy. We always try to release hedgehogs where we find them, because obviously they do best in the area that they've been found, and you don't want to take them too far away from that area. However, if it's not suitable, so for example, the hedgehog's been found in the middle of a road, or it's been found in a garden that's full of trash and has a very dangerous dog, then we will kind of, you know, very subtly say to him, look, for the welfare of the hedgehog, it's better if we relocate the hedgehog somewhere locally in a nice wildlife friendly garden. And then for the second question, which I have now just forgotten,
hold on, I'll remind you of the second part of that. Is that after that, do you have any way of monitoring the hedgehog once it has been released?
Yeah, so there are lots of new ways that are coming about. I would love to in the future hope that there might be a system where we could microchip hedgehogs, and therefore we would actually get computer data, which would be really brilliant, because it would actually record, it would tell us where the hedgehog goes, how the distance that they cover, and also where they die, which would give us information on what's causing them to die. Currently at the moment we don't have anything like that. It's far too expensive. I know that some rescues at the moment are trying like little tags which kind of go into the spikes, but they're not particularly great because they're quite hard to see, and they obviously fall off after a little while, and they don't have any actual sensor, so therefore they can't be linked to a computer. So really the only means that we rely on, we do mark our hedgehogs with a tiny little blob normally of Tipex, which the local people that know us will therefore, our people get in touch with me and say, oh, we've seen one of your hedgehogs because it's got a little blob of Tipex on it. But you know, I want to make that clear, that's not harmful to the hedgehog in any way, and it fades after about 2 to 3 weeks, and if it's raining a lot it fades even more. You won't even know that they were ever in a rescue after a couple of weeks, really. And yeah, also cameras, obviously. Some of our release sites do have wildlife cameras, which is really beneficial because it's a great way to keep an eye on them, but we don't, that's not a requirement for that. And then the classic method of knowing whether you've got a hedgehog living in a box, obviously, is what I call the hay trick. So if you just plump up a bit of hay in the entrance, if a hedgehog goes in or out, then they'll leave a nice big hole, so you will absolutely know whether there's a hedgehog in there or not, and that's obviously the easiest method.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of related to the topic of release sites and making sure that the release site is appropriate, I've got another question that's come in from Mel, and it's a question around food, and the issue around is Mel's had some advice about leaving wet food out, and the fact that the risk with wet food is that you can have fly strike, which is particularly bad for hedgehogs. So that's one of the downsides of wet food compared to dry cat or dog food, leaving out wet cat or dog food. What are your thoughts in terms of the different types of food, wet food versus dry food? So
for feeding stations and being out in the garden, we always recommend biscuits. Wet food, exactly as she's just said, it's not ideal, it's not suitable at all. If you have hedgehogs that you know are fussy and they're only eating wet food, then of course you'll put wet food out. But on the whole, we encourage people to try to encourage their hedgehogs to eat biscuits for a number of reasons. First of all, biscuits are better for their teeth. Obviously, wet food is very wet. It doesn't require much chewing, so a bit similar to a rabbit. You want biscuits. It helps keep their teeth nice and healthy, wear it down, and prevent gum disease, which occurs in a lot of hedgehogs as they get older. So that's one benefit of biscuits. Also, biscuits are obviously less wastage, easier to remove and clean than a lot of wet food, and most importantly, fly strike risk. So as you just said, wet food is very smelly, therefore it attracts flies, but not just flies. It will attract a range of other pests. And it will also attract slugs, because obviously slugs will eat meat as well. So on the whole, I just tend to avoid wet food when it's outside. It's very messy and difficult, and it's actually less hygienic than biscuits as well, because obviously if you imagine a lot of hedgehogs eating from a bowl with their saliva into wet food, whereas in biscuits they can pluck a biscuit out and eat it in their mouth. So actually for transmitting disease, biscuits are actually also better to use in a feeder in a garden.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Mel, I hope that helps your question or answers your question. You were talking about release, and I know one of the things that you are quite keen on is winter release, which in some quarters might be seen as, I don't know if it's controversial or if it's just really quite new and perhaps less understood. So I know you support or you do a lot of winter release. Tell me more about the criteria that might apply for winter release and why it's beneficial.
Yeah, so winter releasing, you're right, it is quite controversial, and I do people do try to get into arguments with me about, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. To be honest, when I started training years ago, it wasn't something that happened, and it was never heard of. And actually, I was transformed into actually doing winter releases. To start off with, I was quite similar to a lot of traditional rescues, and just thought, no, in my head, I imagined a hedgehog being let out in the snow and cold and how cruel that was. And then a friend of mine who runs a rescue nearby, who is one of the most experienced hedgehog ladies in the whole country, she's been doing it for years, she sat down with me and actually explained what it entails into a winter rescue. And then I actually thought, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. So I mean, I probably don't have time to go into too much detail, but on my page I have a very detailed video about the pros and cons of it. What I would say with winter releasing is that it is a set procedure to doing it. So the hedgehog is released directly into a box, and you have to make sure that they walk into the box. And they therefore have some time to acclimatise inside the box. So it's not too cold because they're not in the actual outside, they're in the box. And normally what happens is their natural instinct to hibernate kicks in within about 24 hours. So I actually wrote down to tell you, between the space of October 2020 and the start of March, we released 36 hedgehogs, and of those 36, all of them went into hibernation in their boxes except for 2. So I think that shows just how successful winter releases are. They're now, waking up, happily eating about in the garden, and have had, it means that they've not been in a hospital, which is very stressful. And I always stress that you want to keep a hedgehog for as little amount of time as possible. Otherwise, we get a lot of hedgehogs that are what we call failing to thrive, and hedgehogs can become failing to thrive hedgehogs just by keeping them for too long. So that was one of the things that I learned very early on from the big hospitals that I worked at, that actually keeping a hedgehog just because it's winter and then holding on to them until spring is quite unfair for their welfare, and it actually makes them, they can start losing weight, they can get poorly again, when in fact the cold does not harm them. I always stress that. It's very important. In winter, the only things to avoid for releasing are if there's heavy ground frost and it's continuous, obviously you wouldn't release, or if there's heavy rain. Rain is important because it saturates the ground, which means they can't get any food, and also risk of flooding. But in terms of cold, it can be as cold as you like. It does not affect the hedgehog. They will happily be in their box and go into hibernation, and it's completely fine.
So that's fantastic to know, because I make reference. I know I had a hedgehog in the garden that went into rescue, and 4 weeks later, at the start of February, came out. So I've kind of had personal experience of winter rescue, and it's very successful. That hedgehog has grown massively and is still a resident in the garden, and like you say, is very happy, because you're trying to strike that balance between keeping them in the hospital because it's better for them in terms of their health, but trying to get them out of the hospital as fast as possible because that's better in terms of reduced stress, aren't you?
Yeah, so I mean, some points, obviously winter release doesn't suit all hedgehogs, so it's very much down to the case. So if we have hedgehogs that we got hold of when they were babies, and they really need that kind of that soft release period, so from spring to summer we'll do soft release where they'll be put into a pen outside, and they'll stay there for about a week. Obviously winter release hedgehogs don't get that, therefore they need to be, straightforward cases like they've had lungworm and they've got better. All those, the majority, about 80% of cases can do winter release, but there will be ones that would have had worse injuries or would have been with us for months and therefore need that extra time. So we will keep those over winter and then release them in the spring. But we've found this to be extremely successful. And any person that comes to me that has said, oh no, that's cruel, blah, 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 once I've actually sat and explained it to them online, they've actually said, oh, actually, no, I understand that makes sense. And you're actually, we only release them where there's food and water sources and shelter. And like I just said, proof from the amount of hedgehogs that we release, the majority of them just go into hibernation and stay where they're put. And I would also say a really important point quickly, that the other problem with keeping hedgehogs too long, so over the whole of winter, is that they often become overweight. And it's very, very hard. Any rescuer knows it's very hard to get a hedgehog to lose weight once they've gained it. And obviously, if they can't curl, once they can't curl, you can't release them because then they have no protection from predators. So we don't want that to happen, and we don't want them to become stressed. So like you've said, if they need to be kept in the hospital, they will be, but we will always try to get them out. So even if it's in winter, we'll just do winter releases. It runs nice and smooth. It's relatively quite boring. I mean, I did a video of it. It's just a hedgehog walking into a box and voila, that's it. And then we keep an eye on them with cameras or by any means, and they're absolutely fine.
Yeah. If we come back to focusing on Hoggywobbles itself, and you've mentioned how you have the community around you. You're in the village of, I'm never going to get it right, it's Saffra Monteiro, isn't it?
It's quite Saffra Monteiro, yeah.
Saffra Monteiro. So,
yeah.
and from what I can tell, if from what I've seen, you are actually really quite active within your community and the village. Like you said, the village know you, they know your hedgehog, so to speak, and the work that you do. So that community is really important for you. But how are they, I want to say how are they supporting you, but what's the future for Hoggywobbles, and why is that community support important for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's the community around the rescue is so important. Obviously, I rely completely on donations and the kindness of the locals, and even people from abroad have sent donations to me, which has absolutely been really touching and amazing. Obviously, one of my main goals when I started this was education, and so I do know loads of people in the village, and they do say, "Oh, that's the hog house. There's the hog girl," and they love it. They'll see me trudging around the village with newspapers, collecting them on my little wheelie, and that's, I've helped so many people in the village who years ago were giving hedgehogs bread and milk, and now I've got them to be amazing, successful wildlife gardens. And I like to think, I'm quite proud of Hoggywobbles because I like to think we offer a lot of services that other rescues don't have the time to offer. So I will go around to someone's garden and say, here's a list of exactly how to make your garden perfect for hedgehogs. And I will offer hands-on help, and I will do talks at schools, and talks to anyone that wants them, really. And it's just there to have that support. Because obviously if we can educate, then we can help more hedgehogs, and that's what I want to do long term. I don't want to keep all my knowledge that I've learned. There's no point me keeping it to myself. I want to train people, I want to train volunteers, and I just want to get as many hedgehogs helped as possible, really. And hopefully with their support, we can raise enough funds, and over time we can build a proper bespoke hedgehog building which will have everything that we need in it, and then at that point I will begin recruiting local volunteers and creating a team, because obviously that's what I want long term. If I can't be there on a day, I want to know that I've got a team that I've trained that know what they're doing and can continue to teach other people. It's all about getting the message out there, and just that's the only way we're going to help the hedgehogs, is just by constantly telling people how it should be done and how it shouldn't be done, and getting them involved, kids as well, getting them involved young. Yeah, it's so important.
And one of the things I know you've done, apart from your fundraising, which I think these are your fundraising cans. One of the things we're about to see is that you've created this concept of a Hoggywobbles. Is it a Hoggywobbles champion?
Yes.
What is a Hoggywobbles champion?
So a Hoggywobbles champion is someone who has gone above and beyond normal capacity or means to help us, so through fundraising or volunteering, or getting loads of newspapers over to us. Or we also offer a taxi service, which is really important because we're quite rural, so a lot of people don't drive. I don't drive, so sometimes I need people to get hedgehogs to me, or I need to get hedgehogs to my colleagues. So I created the Hoggywobbles taxi service, which is all run by local volunteers, lovely people who will drive around for us. And yeah, the champions idea, I just thought, let's find a way just to thank those people that really went above and beyond what they could do. And I thought that would be a nice way to get that for your post, your letterbox, with a little badge, just to say thanks in a way.
So that's something that people are getting, you say, through their letterbox. It's something that they're kind of recognized for. Yeah,
exactly. And I hope it gives them kind of a sense of pride, and then they'll talk to other people about hedgehogs and just spread the word. And I've definitely noticed since I created Hoggywobbles in a village, people are talking together more. It's made the community more friendly. It just gives a topic. People are talking over the fences and saying, oh, have you seen your hedgehog tonight? Oh, that or that. Oh yeah, Saffra's bringing a hedgehog there. And it's really nice, because what I wanted to do was form, I've been working my way around and forming gardens together, so that we've got more kind of blocks for hedgehogs rather than single gardens, so that we're creating highways and nice environments long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on the subject of fundraising, I know that you've got, I believe it's on Monday the 29th, so next Monday, you've got a specific fundraising event happening. Tell me more about that. And just for everyone who's watching, there is a link to that in this video description, so you can go straight to it's to your Facebook page where the event is shown. But tell us more about that, Saffra.
Yeah, so obviously with COVID, this year's been really, really rough. All the events like fairs and things have been cancelled. So I thought I would start doing some online events. So I've had some amazing crafters who make bespoke items, hedgehog glass items, all sorts, hedgehog toys, hedgehog paintings, hedgehog cards from all around the country and even abroad, have sent in these items. And we're basically going to have a big Easter bonanza on the 29th. And you can basically bid on items all day long, bid against each other, and hopefully we'll make lots and lots of money, which will go into our fund pot towards building a proper Hoggywobbles hospital. Obviously I don't know how long that will take to realize my dream and get the building, but we'll keep doing all these fundraisers as much as we can, so that we keep adding to the pot.
Brilliant. Well, I know across the country, and I think throughout Europe and in many places throughout the world, the fact that rescues haven't been able to raise funds through the pandemic have really affected them, and so all of these creative ways of raising funds have come about. So everything of the best, and like I say, there's a link in the video description directly to that event, so if people are watching and want to find out more and take part, then the link is there. A couple more questions that have come in, if I can very quickly ask you. And the one is from Sarah, going back to kind of the topic of release, but how can someone make their garden more hedgehog friendly?
So there's like a huge range that you can. I'd say the most important ones are habitat, so and access. So access, you've got to make sure the hedgehogs can get in and out, so creating highways. Then secondly, habitat. So you want plants, shrubs. They love prickly, they love holly, nettles. Let some corners grow wild. Hedgehogs love that. It's really good for beetles and caterpillars. Don't cut your trees down. Don't get rid of your real grass. If you've got a fake lawn, get rid of it and put in some real grass, because it's so important for worms. And just creating nice sheltered corners. Like I said, also making sure you haven't got any hazards. You can create little wildlife ponds, just make sure that they've got sloping sides or ways for the hedgehog to get in and out. And then obviously food and water. Water is really important, should be out all year round. Just a little, little flower pot bases with water in. It's as simple as that. And then if you want to go a step further, feeders and hedgehog houses, you can buy them online, you can make them. I've got loads of information on my page on Facebook about how to make feeders, what food to provide, how to keep it clean, and then obviously houses. And if you could, it's like everyone says, if you create it, they will come, even if it takes a while. I get a lot of people who say, oh, I've set this all up and nothing's coming. It will. I guarantee you it will. You just have to be patient and let it take its course.
Yeah. Just on the topic, and I know, again, I've got all the information relative to your Facebook page is in the video description, and there's a lot of information that you've put together in terms of, like you say, how to build houses, how to create the habitats. There's all kinds of information and brochures and pamphlets that you've put together. So I'd really encourage people to go and have a look at your Facebook page. And of course, follow the page, because there's lots of information always coming out that you're providing. Just one very last question that I know and I saw was up, and it relates to both the feeding and the food. But earlier when we were talking about the wet food, just a question that came up about that. But what are the criteria or requirements around keeping those food bowls clean?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. You broke up. Can you repeat it?
No. It's not a problem. It was just food bowls. It's going about cleaning the food bowls for the hedgehogs, especially once you've had wet food. Is it advisable to constantly be cleaning the food bowls?
Yes, it's really important. I can't stress that enough. Most of the time we see feeders, they're not cleaned often enough. So I clean mine every morning diligently. You can do it every 2 days if you haven't got the time, but you really should do it every day. I just use the easiest and the cheapest method is boiling up a kettle. And then you literally just pour the kettle over the bowls, over the feeding base. It will kill everything. I absolutely swear by it. You can do the same with hibernation boxes and then leave them out to dry before filling them back up and putting them in place. If you don't want to use boiling water or it's dangerous or whatever, you can get safe sprays like Safe 4. And you can get them online. They're more expensive, so really boiling water is the best method. That's what I use.
Perfect. Brilliant. Saffra, thank you so much for spending the time with us this evening. It's been absolutely such an insight into the different type of work that you do, and the concept of a convalescent hedgehog hospital is just absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. All the best with your Easter Bonanza on Monday and your fundraising. And I'm sure, well, hedgehog hospitals don't really have quiet times and busy times. It's just busy all the time. But I'm sure now going into spring, you'll get a different type of hedgehog patient coming through the hospital. So all the best. And again, thank you so much for joining. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. And thank you for joining. It's been great to have you joining our live stream. Don't forget, we will have a live stream. It's the last Thursday of every month. If you want to know more about what's forthcoming in the live stream, do join up our monthly newsletter. And the links, again, are all in the video description below. All the information you might want is in the video description below. So have a read through that, and you'll find out more about Saffra, the work that she's doing, and the links to her Facebook page. So from myself, Mike, until next time, thank you very much once more. Have a great evening. You take care. Bye-bye.